There, now it's recording.
So we
Welcome, everyone. My name's Doug Orr. I'm the chair of the local group of Sierra Club, Woods and Wetlands. We cover the northeast corner of Illinois, including most of Lake County, northeast Cook County, and part of McHenry County. Welcome to tonight's speaker series. We will be recording this session to post on our YouTube channel. If you don't wish to be seen, please shut off your video, which is located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. At this time, Rosemary will introduce our speaker. Rosemary?
Thank you, Doug. Welcome to another Speaker Series program meeting sponsored by the Woods and Wetlands Group of the Illinois Sierra Club. My name is Rosemary Heileman, and I will be your host this evening. Doug, did you want to spotlight me maybe? Our Speaker Series programs feature lectures on topics related to our environment, stewardship, wildlife and nature, public policy, and anything about outdoor activities like hiking and canoeing or even bird watching. In a minute, we will hear from our featured speaker, Sally Burgess, Sierra Club Advocate Director, and her colleague, Scott Allen, Energy Policy Specialist from the Citizens Utility Board. They will share information about data centers in our communities. But first, we have a couple of brief announcements. As Doug said, we are recording this so you can watch it in the future. Turn off your camera if you don't wish to appear on the video. We will send out the YouTube address for the program later this week so that you can watch it again or share it with your friends. Before we begin, please make sure that you are muted, especially if you have a barking dog, a television, or other commotion in the background. Please feel free to ask any questions of our speakers this evening by using the chat at the bottom of your screen. We will select questions afterward, and they will be directed to Sally after her presentation. Now let's move on to our April featured speaker, Sally Burgess. Sally has an MBA from Fontbonne University in St. Louis, as well as a Master's of Science in Environmental Policy Communication from Southern Illinois University in her hometown of Edwardsville. She and her husband consider themselves to be hobby homesteaders and live in an area surrounded by farm fields. They have goats, many dogs, chickens, and one duck. Sally is the Sierra Club Downstate Advocacy Director. She works engaging Sierra Club's East Central and Southern Illinois groups, as well as partner organizations across several sectors. She is a steering committee member of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. Sally provides support on the mining issues team, the Clean Power team, and the Shawnee National Forest Committee. Tonight, she will focus on clean energy and data centers. We welcome you, Sally and Scott. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. And good evening, everyone. Really delighted to be with you tonight. Get the slides going. Okay, everybody can see that, I hope. Yes, great. Okay. Scott and I are here tonight to talk about the unprecedented challenges of data center development in Illinois. And what I know from the first time I did one of these presentations, I was invited to do this many, many weeks ago. And since then, a lot of people around the state have learned a lot about data centers. There's just a tsunami of them coming our way. So we're talking on behalf of Sierra Club, the Citizens Utility Board, who are both partners of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. And many of you know that the Clean Jobs Coalition is responsible for helping the state of Illinois be one of the leading states in the nation for renewable energy and a green energy future. So we are currently working on a piece of legislation called the Power Act, the Protect Our Water, Energy and Ratepayers Act, and that is to put guardrails around data centers. Tonight, Scott and I are going to talk about, we're doing a general overview, assuming that some folks know a lot about data centers and others maybe not as much. So we're going to talk about why all of a sudden there's this onslaught of the really huge data centers coming our way. We're going to discuss the top line concerns regarding our resources and the impact on our health. We're going to talk about climate considerations, of course, and then we'll talk about solutions. So at the end of it, we'll talk about some of the things, the two-pronged approach we have, where we're looking at local strategies and also the state legislation that I mentioned. A lot of people wonder if it even matters if we do anything when we're faced with these data centers that are owned by such wealthy corporations. It absolutely matters. This is a report from a newsletter that you might be interested in checking out at some point called The Cool Down. They do a lot of sustainability articles, and it stems from recognizing that $98 billion in AI data center development was pushed back because of community resistance. They were referring to it as the Great Data Center Rebellion, and it started in earnest about the second quarter of 2025. And we know that in the state of Illinois, that has also been true. Just last week, I believe it was, we heard that Yorkville City Council just said, no, we're not moving forward with this data center. We've just completely lost our appetite for it. So it absolutely matters what we do. So data centers are simply buildings that store computer infrastructure. And physical requirements, you have to have the computer chips, and those chips generate a lot of heat. If you've ever sat with your computer on your lap, you know that it gets really very hot. Imagine huge centers filled with computers, how hot that would be. Then we need energy to power the computer chips, and then more energy to cool it down. We need water for the cooling, and then land for the facility themselves. Some of these huge data centers are taking up 300-400 acres of land. We know that there have been data centers since the 40s, maybe even earlier than that, and many of them provide the vital services that we rely on every day: our banking, some healthcare, government services, streaming. Many of the data centers that we know about are absolutely essential to the way to our digital life that we live. But why are we now being besieged with these huge hyperscale data centers that are attempting to move into every part of the state? Well, that has to do with generative AI, like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. Those services are creating a demand for more power than we have ever needed and the emergence of new massive data centers called hyperscalers. When you try to find a definition of a hyperscale data center, there really isn't a definition. In the state of Illinois, we typically think if it is 50 megawatts or more, then that is a big data center. Illinois is one of the top 5 targeted states in the U.S. for data center development, and the amount of data center applications received by utilities would more than double the amount of energy demanded, demand for Illinois. It would require so much more energy than we currently have available. So hyperscale data centers and generative AI. Generative AI is specialized AI that creates new content. You can give it some instructions and it can create a paragraph for you, or maybe even an entire essay. You can ask it to generate a particular kind of image. It will do that for you. And it's based on training data. So though it excels at doing these tasks that we ask of it, it is not sentient. It does not possess understanding or reasoning. What is required to get it to the point where it can listen to your instructions and create what you've asked it to create is it needs to be trained, and that's called large learning models. These models literally scrape the internet for data. They go through social media, they go through Reddit, they go through every bit of information it can possibly come up with, which is why there are often complaints that people's work is being plagiarized. They're just going through and they're generating they are consuming unfathomable amounts of data and computing power. And there is an increased demand for generative AI because more of us are using it. And that is part of what is creating this crush of trying to get these hyperscale data centers going all over the country. There's a very interesting book called The Empire of AI, written by a reporter who spent 3 years investigating the various sources. And she points out that the empire, these AI moguls such as Open AI and the people who've created Google, Meta, Amazon, they've never been richer. They've never been wealthier. And meanwhile, the rest of the world is beginning to collapse under the weight of the exploding human and material costs of this new era. So among the health concerns are light pollution. Data centers, the lighting for a data center can remind you of a football stadium, just really lit up and so bright, to a typical industrial park. Artificial light, we know, disrupts circadian rhythms. It suppresses melatonin production. It increases our risk of chronic diseases such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic disorders. Lowers our quality of life, obviously, can create eye strain and psychological distress. This is from a website called Environmental Health Project. This is the health consequences for humans. We also know there are consequences for wildlife. Migratory birds, for example, pollinators are disrupted. Farmers are concerned about what's going to happen to their livestock if they have a data center within sight of their farm. How is that going to affect the animals? Additionally, there's noise pollution. That is generally described as a low humming to a low pitch roar. We know that people near data centers complain of increased blood pressure, anxiety, vertigo, headaches, ear pain, sleep disturbances. All of those things affect our health in an adverse way. And that comes from a website called Environmental and Energy Study Institute. And then there's the air pollution from the gas plants and diesel backup generators. The increased air pollution is especially difficult around frontline communities who are already experiencing a high level of pollution. Adding more emissions from gas plants and the additional emissions from backup generators is driving up the pollution in those communities exponentially, causing respiratory issues, again, heart disease and cancer, neurological deficit. Heat-related illnesses are starting to be reported. There is something that happens because of the all the cooling that happens inside the facility. It creates a heat island effect, and that can lead to heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And then there's the risk of water being contaminated. The cooling systems, often called closed loop, may use PFAS or other chemicals, and that can leak into our water supply. And as we often hear, children, the elderly, pregnant people, and those with pre-existing conditions are often at highest risk. And that's from the Environmental Health Project. We're going to move on to Scott now, who's going to talk to us about why in the world are they coming to Illinois?
Yes, thank you, Sally. And like Sally mentioned, Illinois is, I believe, the fifth most popular state in the country for attracting data centers. Generally, we're seeing a lot of the Midwest being presented with opportunities for data centers, but Illinois leads the Midwestern states for a couple of reasons that you see here on the screen. I think in talking to some of the people from Aurora, some of the municipal staff from Aurora, we're kind of finding out why it is the suburbs, and particularly Aurora, are so popular with data centers. And that is that first point about strong fiber optics networks. And with Aurora being in fairly close proximity of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, they get that low latency ping between the data center and the mercantile exchange. But also, I think there's been a conception, and I imagine, Sierra Club people who know this better than anybody, that Illinois doesn't have very strong water regulations, water use regulations. And there's been this misconception that the Midwest is flush forever with water. We'll never have water shortage issues here, mainly because of the Great Lakes, but also just because we're not a desert. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but we have also hung out the open for business sign in Illinois. A couple of years ago, we started offering tax incentives for data centers to locate here. And while they don't seem to be taking too much advantage of those tax incentives now, it certainly didn't help to open the door to them and show that Illinois was welcoming. Next slide, please, Sally. And so we're finding as we learn more about data centers, when we talk to the organizers in communities, what they're hearing from the data centers themselves and from their elected officials, what is it that is most attractive to our elected officials? We were talking a little bit before the recording started about how data centers, the polling around data centers, is one of the most unpopular things among the public that we've seen in a very long time. But what is it that's causing so many of our elected officials to kind of have wide eyes for these data centers? It's jobs and tax revenue. The jobs associated with data centers, though, the bulk of those jobs tend to be in the construction. And obviously, while the construction of a data center in stages can take many, many years, those jobs eventually do finish up and go away. And the permanent staffing at a data center, it varies from what we understand from a dozen people to 20 some people, but it's not a gigantic job creator in a community. Tax revenue, this example here from DeKalb, where the city made a deal with Meta or Facebook, the parent company of Facebook, where the school district received $20 million, and they worked out a way to lower property tax bills for their residents. But this is not a foregone conclusion for a community. It's not by any means. I don't think it would be safe to consider this normal, because again, we've heard from communities all over the state where these offers for property tax relief especially vary wildly. Next slide, please, Sally. The water use, it's, I guess it shouldn't be surprising to find out that water use is really concerning for people in Illinois, and I think elsewhere in the nation too. Sally mentioned the heat that these data centers produce when they're doing compute. The chips create a lot of heat. The cooling systems run to cool all of that down, and those cooling systems use water. So whether it's a closed loop system or an open loop system where it discharges, either way, it's using a lot of water. And again, the claims on how much water data centers are using have varied widely from data center to data center. It almost seems as if they're telling people kind of what they want to hear, that we don't use that much water. The technology is getting better. But it's also important to keep in mind that there's no requirement for any one type of cooling system to be used. And we know that these data centers can use up to 5 million gallons of water a day, or nearly 2 billion gallons of water annually. But we also know that with the volume of data centers that we're expecting to come online, that is either going to mean building new thermal plants, gas, nuclear potentially. And we also know that those plants use a gigantic amount of water themselves. So it's not just the data centers that we're concerned about. It's also the power generation to power these data centers that we're concerned about. Though, like I mentioned, Illinois doesn't have any strict or really comprehensive laws around water use and allocation, with the exception of the binational agreements that we have on Lake Michigan with Canada and with other states. Apart from that, we're really pretty exposed here. So for people who get their drinking water from aquifers, it's a big concern, especially considering that a large part of the state is under some level of drought, and some parts of the state have been in severe drought conditions for quite a long time. Next slide, please, Sally. And then there's the energy affordability piece, which this is the one that I hear most about. The question we get most about at CUB is, will data centers cause our electric bills to go up? And the answer is yes, that they already have caused your electric bills to go up. And for the ComEd customers, I would guess that you remember last summer, probably July or August, you opened your ComEd bill and you noticed a pretty big price spike. And that was a function of these data centers. And I'll explain a little bit without getting too deep into how all of this works. What are the two drivers? What are the two things that we're concerned about on the utility and the energy side? The first and kind of the easier one to understand are the infrastructure costs. So if you have a data center, like the one we were talking about in Joliet, it's just under 2 gigawatts is what they want to build. And that is more energy than a small city uses. That's as much energy, I think, as the city of St. Louis uses. So you can imagine the amount of infrastructure, the poles and wires and transformers and substations and all of that utility infrastructure. You can imagine how much that would take to serve that data center. The way that works is that ComEd would go out and purchase all of this infrastructure to accommodate whatever the data center says that this is how much we need to use. It'll eventually be 2 gigawatts. Maybe it starts out as 500 megawatts or 800 megawatts. So ComEd's going to start planning and building that stuff. And we have a situation where maybe, like Sally had mentioned, that there's a large data center in Texas that is getting set further and further behind as they go. Well, as ComEd's planning and building and purchasing all of this infrastructure, that data center could, for whatever reason, maybe things go sideways entirely and they're no longer going to build that data center. Or they say that, well, instead of 2 gigawatts, we're only going to build 600 megawatts. Well, ComEd has already been purchasing, right, all of this infrastructure and planning for it to be built. And now who's going to pay for that cost if it's not going to be used? So we hear from communities all the time, the data centers are saying that we'll pay for all of that up front. The problem is that that is not the way that our utility regulations work. It has to be, tariffs are what guide our interconnection rules. So for us residential customers or commercial customers, we have these tariffs where the utility describes how service works with each customer class, who pays what, how that money is collected, what is the rate of equity or the return on equity for that. So without those tariffs in place, specifically describing who pays for those costs of these data centers, ComEd is going to recover that money from all of their ratepayers unless they are told otherwise, unless they write a tariff that says otherwise. And currently we do not have that. Right now, the way that it works is that if a data center wants to interconnect with ComEd, they put down, essentially, they make a deposit, a percentage of the total cost of that project. And so if we're talking 50, 60, or $100 million for this infrastructure, and the data center is putting down 10 or $20 million, or even less than that, if things go badly, ComEd is going to recover that money from all of us, all of you. So that's on the infrastructure side. We're also very concerned on the energy side, and this is what it has caused our electric bills to increase already. So capacity markets. I'm sure that we Sierra Club members have heard quite a bit about capacity markets over the last couple of years. This is where our biggest concern comes from. So capacity is the ability for us to meet our our energy demands at any time. It's how much generation do we have out on the grid, out on PJM's grid, for instance. How many generators are out there? How much can they produce when called upon? And can we get enough of them to promise we pay them so that when PJM calls and says that tomorrow we expect really hot weather and we're going to need you to turn on and ramp up your gas plant or whatever it is so that we can meet that high demand. Well, there's a finite amount of generation in PJM's territory. And we're already kind of struggling. We have been for years in these capacity markets, even without the threat of data centers, because we're shutting down coal plants. We're finally starting to shut down gas plants, and we're getting solar and wind and batteries ready, but we need that transmission in place first. So as these dirty plants go offline, our margins for spare electricity are getting smaller and smaller. And so what we see in this instance is all of these data centers out there, not necessarily being built, but just the threat of them out there. So when the grid operator takes a look around its territory and says, here's how much load we serve now, here's how much load could potentially come on in the next 1, 2, or 3 years, here's how much generation we have, and here's what we are going to predict that the weather's going to be like over the next 3 years. And they take that out to all these power plants they're asking to promise to turn on their coal plants or their gas plants or the nuclear plants or whatever. And these generators are looking at that and saying, yeah, we can meet that need, but that means that gas plant that we might only run once or twice a year, now we're going to need to run that thing more frequently and for more hours in the day, which means higher fuel costs, operations and maintenance, labor costs. And so that is what is causing these capacity prices to drive up, is the threat of all of these data centers coming online. And capacity makes up, when we get our ComEd bills or Ameren bills, and that energy supply section, that is wrapped up. The cost of our energy and the cost of that capacity are both wrapped up in that one charge. And so that is what is driving that up. And so we already know that next summer, starting on June 1st, we already know that ComEd is going to be paying more. ComEd customers are going to be paying more this summer than they were last summer. And the PJM market monitor, the independent market monitor, blames that on data centers. So that's not my analysis of that. That is the analysis of the firm that is in charge of observing those capacity auctions. Next slide, please, Sally. And on the other side of that, so we have these kind of shrinking margins of available electricity, in addition to more extreme climate, which means stronger storms, which means power outages. So data centers, they want to ensure that they can run around the clock all the time. They constantly want to be running. They don't need any kinds of disruptions. So they tend to bring along a gigantic amount of backup generation, and typically this is diesel generation. It's hard to say exactly how much, like what's the formula, but we kind of figure it's, they bring pretty close to 2 times the amount that they think they'll need in backup generation. So if you have a 500 megawatt data center, they're going to bring about a gigawatt of backup diesel generation. And that is a lot of diesel. So something happens, the grid goes down, they're going to fire those things up and make sure that their operation is still running. And meanwhile, the people around those generators are choking on the fumes and listening to that noise around the clock. We also know that this is all causing our those coal plants and those gas plants that we've worked so hard to get a closure date on in Illinois. We're seeing already the consideration that we might have to keep those plants open past the dates that we won in CEJA. And beyond that, I mean, that is a huge problem for us here in Illinois, but it is presenting a larger problem to the people who are generally agnostic about power generation. they're worried that we eventually will not be able to generate enough electricity, period. No matter how many plants we force to stay open or how many new gas plants we build, we can't build them quickly enough to cover the threat of all of this data center load. And so the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, is getting really nervous about our ability to even maintain a reliable grid. Next slide, please, Sally. Yes, and I mentioned the backup diesel generators. We did win a provision in the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act last year that tried to limit the length of time a diesel generator could run on emergency. Unfortunately, there was a pretty big loophole that was exploited almost instantly in that. So that's something that we need to fix pretty quickly. And if anybody gets a chance to talk to a person who lives anywhere near the large data center in Aurora, if you really want to hear how nightmarish this situation can be, I would take them up on that, because it is pretty haunting to see what they have to deal with. Next slide. And is this one yours, Sally, or is this one mine? I can't remember. I got lost, but I'll take it. So like Sally mentioned, we're seeing this massive proliferation of speculation around data centers. And I think at this point, like, there's no question that data centers are, at this point, are 90% of our economy, or 70 or 80 or 90% of our economy. It's taken over our entire economy. And I think at this point, the experts say that it's most definitely a bubble. The question is, how big is that bubble going to get before it inevitably bursts? That doesn't mean that all data centers are going to go away. That means that there are going to be a whole lot of losers and probably a couple of winners to keep pursuing this artificial general intelligence race. Those hyperscale data centers are really in a position now to kind of sell the hype of artificial intelligence, because they're in constant need of a new round of funding, because they burn money so quickly on data centers, on construction, on whatever. But that is not going to stop them from trying to build these things in order to survive and make it to that next round after the larger bubble bursts. And I think there's a real question of, what do we do with these square miles of building that, as we understand it, isn't really good for much else than housing a whole bunch of servers, because fairly low ceilings, not great lighting. I suppose you could, maybe turn Illinois into the laser tag capital of the world. But we could probably find something better to do with all of that land and all of that waste that will inevitably come. Another thing that we've been hearing a lot in the fight at the local level, the municipal level, and the county level are, on the one hand, everybody dislikes data centers, but also people aren't real hot on renewable energy being developed either. And in fact, I live in McLean County in Bloomington, and we're going through this right now where our county just passed some new zoning rules that really, they wanted to make it clear that we would not like to have any data centers in McLean County. But then at the same zoning board meeting, they approved a permit for another solar project. And that got a lot of people in McLean County and Bloomington and Normal pretty upset. And I think, I don't remember who it was. I think it was Emily, maybe Chocolates, that put this slide together. Whoever did is brilliant, because there's a real difference between what a data center offers and what a clean energy project offers. And obviously, a data center is going to be it's going to be using power and water, and we're going to have these giant permanent, semi-permanent structures on the land. Whereas clean energy projects, No, they don't have a huge permanent workforce behind them either, but they are contributing. They're giving us the clean energy that we need so that we can transition away from fossil fuels. They're not taking our water. And these projects are also subject to, uh, they're built intentionally to be pretty rapidly decommissioned so that that land can be returned back to whatever purpose, farming, whatever it was. Um, so I think it's really important to highlight that there are, whether or not somebody wants solar or wind built, I guess is another matter, but to compare solar and wind projects to data center projects there's a pretty wide gap in between those two. And we think it's important to point that out because this has really turned into a statewide fight. So here is what we propose, we being the Clean Jobs Coalition. We have written the POWER Act, the Protect Our Water, Energy, and Ratepayers Act. We focus on three main areas where we see the biggest sources of disruption. That is on our energy and our water, which we talked about, and then on our communities too. The pollution impacts on our communities and the many disruptions that come along with that. And I believe it's back to you now, Sally.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. So, continuing our discussion about the POWER Act, one of the things that we are looking to do is make sure there is transparent public engagement. I'll bet everyone listening tonight who's in a community that is dealing with the data center or who knows someone in a community dealing with the data center has heard the stories where the community doesn't even know the data center is being planned until suddenly it's in the media. There's no effort to engage the public in these conversations. So we want to make sure that the local electeds are not being forced into non-disclosure agreements, that the community is made aware of these projects very early in the process so they're able to participate in the discussion early on, require the developer to disclose critical baseline data, such as the projected water and energy use. How many backup generators are they going to have? What is their model for how often they're going to use those backup generators? Convene multiple public hearings with advance notice at times that are accessible to people. Additionally, we want to ensure there are local protections in place. Water use requirements, Scott's mentioned a couple of times. We are woefully inadequate in the protections we have in place currently in Illinois. So that is going to be tightened up anyway, across the board. And the important thing to know for communities is that they can negotiate community benefit agreements. They can, if they're in the process early enough, they can get in there and they can say, here are some things that you absolutely cannot do or you must do in our community. Energy requirements to invest in on-site and off-site renewable energy. We want these folks to bring their own clean capacity and renewable energy. Community benefit agreements can insist upon that. Regular public reporting on the water use, air pollution data, the setbacks, noise restrictions, making sure that the folks engaged in the construction projects are hired locally whenever possible, and also temporary moratoriums. And one of the things you can do, you can aim your phone right at that QR code if you would like, and this takes you to the action alert that Sierra Club has put together. This is going to send your legislators, your rep and your senator, your comment that you want them to vote yes on the POWER Act, which is Senate Bill 4016, House Bill 5513. And I'll pause for just another few seconds so you can capture that QR code. We can also put a link to it in the chat if that is helpful for folks. And then I'm going to turn it back to Scott, who's going to tell us about a big action coming at the end of May.
Yes, this is maybe the biggest action. I've been doing this for a while now. Lobby days I've been going to them for a while now, and this I think safe to say that we've set our biggest goal yet for this one. What is it, Sally? 2,000 people? 1,000 people?
1,000
A
people.
1,000 people. And Sierra Club volunteers make the best lobby day spokespeople because they hear about these issues way more than the general public does. They've been tracking these kinds of issues for years, and they know the nuances more than the general public does. So I always love seeing the Sierra Club volunteers at Lobby Day and having them on my lobby team because then I don't have to do anything. I don't have to talk at all. I just have to show people where the rooms are. So I would love to see all of the Sierra Club people at all of these lobby days. And that's not just because I'm lazy. It's because they really do make the best advocates.
And we can also put a link to that in the chat if you were unable to grab the QR code. And before we get into our Q&A, I wanted you to know that we have a resource sheet for you here with live links to the folks that were quoted throughout the presentation tonight. And the Wisconsin Sierra Club has put together a really amazing toolkit. It's one of the first toolkits I became aware of called Big Tech Unchecked. So there's a link to that. There's a wonderful website called Halt the Harm Network. They do webinars on data centers, various aspects of data centers on an ongoing basis. They have a ton of information available. Honor the Earth is another website with so much information. Same with Megawatts Over People out of North Carolina. Prescott Balch is a gentleman that Scott and I were at a data center event with in Edwardsville several weeks ago. He's done a lot of work. He is a tech guy who is now talking about data centers. Yes, we need them. No, we don't need these big ones. And here are some real concerns to consider. And then when you have 3 minutes, treat yourself to this YouTube video with comedian Charlie Berens, how AI data centers were invented. It is really funny, and there's foul enough language that we decided not to show it tonight, but it's a ton of fun, and I think you'll really enjoy it. And I'll go ahead and stop my sharing here, and we can get around to Q&A.
The factory is critical to the war effort, providing 1/3 of the total munitions for the Eastern Front. In 1942, Dag Bromberg begins its mass production of gun.
I hear something, but
There, that one of our people had their TV on.
okay.
Linda, are you taking charge of the questions here?
I'm sorry, I was talking with the mute button on. I said thank you to Sally and Scott, and I'm turning it over to Steve and Rosemary for the questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Steve, you want to start with one?
Steve, you may be on mute. He's having trouble tonight. Rosemary, go ahead and
Well, I'll
start.
start with the first one. Jennifer Wojcik wants to know I should just say Jennifer, wants to know how do lithium battery farms fit into this whole discussion?
I do not have an answer to that. Do you, Scott?
I don't know that anybody has an answer to that. I think that everybody hopes that the answer is that that if these data centers do show up and if we can force them to not bring diesel back up and instead lithium ion or any kind of storage for that matter, that's the best outcome.
It's still not taken.
We'll see, I guess.
It has my name.
That would be ideal.
Do you know they want to build the biggest lithium battery farm in the country here in Illinois as of to date?
I have heard rumors. I have just started to kind of ignore those rumors because, to be honest, I don't really believe anything that the data center people say. But the battery, you're talking the battery industry has said that.
Yes,
Okay.
and I know this because they want to build it in my backyard.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
yeah.
It's not a make-believe thing. It's a real thing, and
Part
of the plan is as soon as that's built, the data center will come.
So we did have a the law that we passed in the fall, the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act, one of the parts of that law was that the Illinois Power Agency is now required to procure battery storage, just the same way that they procure renewable energy storage. And so I suspect that that has also incentivized that, Jennifer, because we do have some moderate battery build out in the state, but that really did kind of kick it into overdrive, I think.
Can you repeat the name of that bill so I can research it?
Yes, the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act, and I can probably we have several fact sheets on it, but I can also give you my email address, Jennifer, in
Okay.
case you have any other questions about it.
Thank you.
Okay. Don wants to know, to offset ComEd costs, would it be a good idea to sign up with companies like NextAmp? Will more peaker plants be built, whatever those are, to handle, the peak, to handle emergency needs for data centers?
Well, on the Nexamp thing, I am a Nexamp subscriber. I and we at Cub recommend community solar. Of course, check it out and understand what it is, but yes, we recommend signing up for that. And it's for the peakers. Sally, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we fear that all the coal plants that we have successfully retired will be looking that the administration is looking to bring coal plants back on whenever possible, and that there's going to be more gas plants brought in by the data centers themselves. And then I'm not sure about the peakers in particular, but they're looking for energy any and everywhere they can find it. So it stands to reason that they would be more active as well.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer also is concerned with what you mentioned about what about after the data centers are here, they fail, they become obsolete because there's new technology and fall into disrepair. You mentioned that the communities will pick up the costs. Is there any way to sue the companies or to insist at the beginning in the Power Act that there be a fund set aside for these kinds of results?
I believe there is. I believe that part of the Power Act does cover some of those contingencies. I don't have the details on that. Scott, do you have any additional info?
Yeah, I thought that there was a fee included for decommissioning, in addition to the fund to help specifically environmental justice communities, and then the fund for utility bill relief as well.
There's still a question as to what decommissioning even looks like. So that's one of the challenges with this.
Okay. All right, here's a tip from Leslie, trying to exhort us all to use AI less. It's hard when you Google something and the first paragraph has a wonderful summary in AI. But anyway, she says Google searches can be modified by entering, it looks like minus AI at the end of the search. I didn't know that. So everybody, that's a tip from Leslie. Let's go down to Diane. She says, data, you may have covered this. She came in a little late. Data centers will use energy on the same grid we are using. Oh, yeah, exactly, Diane. These grids aren't built to put up with that much more energy demand. Thus, we will end up with brownouts or actual energy loss. Do I have that right?
Yes, absolutely. Sierra Club is going to be sponsoring this chapter, the Illinois chapter and National Sierra Club will be co-sponsoring a workshop in a couple of weeks that talks about how bringing additional transmission lines on is an important aspect of bringing more renewable energy on, and it all has to do with the fact that our grid is woefully inadequate to what we need currently, let alone the needs that we're facing in the future. Scott, what would you add?
No, I think that's it. That's the important part is that is a huge concern that our state agencies are dealing with right now is, like I said, we were we were kind of struggling to meet our renewable energy targets before all of this data center stuff came up. So, um, you can imagine what it's like on the planning side when we're seeing potentially the load of the entire state double just for data centers.
Okay. Doug has a question that which is a little bit different. What is or is there an impact of Bitcoin or similar financial tools on energy usage?
Bitcoin, I don't, in terms of scale, like comparable scale, like how much energy were we using to mine Bitcoin versus what are we looking at for AI compute? Um, I don't, I think it's magnitudes of difference, magnitudes
Mhm.
of scale and difference. But are you right, Doug, that um, in Ameren, Missouri, we saw this scheme, in fact, where the Ameren, Missouri, they brought in some Bitcoin mining operations uh, for themselves to hook up behind the meter one of their bigger coal plants in Missouri so that they could generate Bitcoin and sell that for revenue. And of course, they got shot down after a while, but and there are still Bitcoining mining operations going on. But this is by far a bigger threat than Bitcoining, I'd say economically and for our grid as well and our energy resources.
Okay, thank you. Pat would like a few more specifics about what the, excuse me, what's in the act regarding water pollution.
We know that we want the data centers to assume responsibility for making sure they have the most advanced technology possible. And the closed loop system apparently does use much less water, but it does come with chemicals. So they have to be able to pre-treat. The goal, I believe, is that they would pre-treat the water before they send it to the wastewater treatment um, plant. It's another piece that we don't really articulate is that all of these data centers and their water usage and the release of the water back to the wastewater treatment center is going to further stress infrastructure for these plants. And many times they're already inadequate as well, haven't been modernized. So my understanding, Pat, is that they're supposed to treat the water before they send it to the wastewater treatment plant so that it can be treated again and then put back into the system. As far as leaks, they are known to happen and they certainly can affect our waterways in an adverse way. I don't know specifically what we have in the legislation that addresses that. Do you, Scott?
But there will be a permitting process where
Right.
to the best of their ability, the EPA and the State Water Survey will do an impact analysis and hopefully capture what happens if we have a leak or the discharge and whatever's in there. Um, but again, like we're starting from almost nothing on water regulation, and really the people who worked on that part of the bill, who wrote that, are really trying to, you know, build a foundation first before they can build regulations on top of that. So uh, it's a pretty comprehensive permitting process.
All right, thank you. So here's a problem. I don't know if you can help with this. What can be done when a village board, this is from Christian, what can be done when a village board has already approved a data center and construction has started already? The Grace Lake Village Board has not been transparent with people about the approval process, and now the first phase of the data center is on track to be finished by the fourth quarter of next year.
There is a statewide group that meets every other Thursday. It's run by our colleague Lori McKiernan, and I'm not sure they probably have dealt with this circumstance. I don't recall hearing people say, okay, the data center is already being built. Now what do we do? Typically, they have been able to push back against data centers that have been approved, and they've actually been able to slow that process down. Um, I think that if you were interested in joining that group, unless you're already part of it, we can get you connected with Lori McKiernan, and that would be a good place for some of you folks to attend. And Scott has just put Lori's email address in the chat. You could reach out to her. She knows a ton about data centers as well. She's been pushing back against the huge center that is proposed in Sangamon County, has been approved in Sangamon County, but they slowed it down significantly. So there may be something that can be done. I'm not positive. And Scott, what would you say?
I would say that Christian, I have not heard of a single county where the approval has happened where anybody thinks that it was done in an open and transparent way.
Yeah.
So I mean that's just been the story of this, and it's the reason that in other states, council councils, village boards, county boards are getting tossed out of office
Mhm.
for that reason.
Okay, thank you.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Sure.
Sally, will you email me the information about this group? And when I send out the video for people to watch, I will include it in the email that goes along with the video because I'm sure people are missing it. And if you just send it to me, I'll incorporate it in that email. Thanks.
I will be very, very happy to do that, Linda.
Okay, Linda, you want me to keep going? Does Steve want to come on, or shall I just keep on going? I guess I'll keep on going.
I can't.
Can
Can
you
you-
pick out a couple good ones? And it's 8 o'clock.
Oh, it's 8 o'clock. Oh, it's 8 o'clock. All right.
Keep going.
I'll should we do the last one here? Jay wants to know, can you comment on the bottleneck of availability of gas turbines? I've heard that there's a 5-year wait to get one. So how are these projects being built?
I don't think they are, Jay. You're exactly right. It's 5 to 7 years to get that stuff. Obviously, um, that is not going to keep up with data center demand. I will say, I guess if your plan was to build nuclear, you might as well build a gas plant because you're going to build that thing many, many years faster than you're going to build a nuclear plant. Um, but I think the concern in this state and in other states is that shuttered gas plants, uh, the data center company, the big companies, the hyperscalers like Meta and Facebook and Grok AI are talking about building or not building, but buying these gas plants for themselves to use. So kind of taking them out of the energy mix, or opening up ones that have already been shut down and paying for them to get back online to supply them.
Linda, you want to say goodnight to everybody?
Yes, I do. And I want to say thank you, especially to Sally and our energy policy specialist, Scott, for sharing with us tonight. You have really lit a lot of fires and opened up a lot of questions that we need to be schooled on and promote further. So thank you for your efforts and your knowledge. Woods and Wetlands and Clean Power Lake County are sponsoring an in-person that is a live workshop on Wednesday, April 29th in downtown Waukegan, 6 to 7:30. This event is Let's Talk About Data Centers, and we'll cover details of local interest, pardon me, and include focus on the basics, a simple look at how data centers work, local impacts, how they affect our air, water, and power grid, and stronger protections, how Clean Power Lake County is advocating for rules that put people first. I'm sure you guys know about this. You can go online. I will include this in the email if it gets out early enough. But you go to Clean Power Lake County, and there's a lovely button you can click on to register. Um, and I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us the evening. And again, thanks to our wonderful speakers, Scott and Sally. You will be receiving an email from me this week, probably early, and it will be a link to our YouTube channel where you can rewatch this program or watch it for the first time. As far as the future, we're going to be on hiatus until the fall. Watch our newsletter. We're trying to cook up some really good programs for September, October, and November. And thank you all again for joining us, and especially to our wonderful speakers. Good night.
Thank you,